Maria Rodriguez had worked at the Pleasant Valley Recycling Center for almost 3 years. It wasn't the kind of job people dreamed about as kids, but it paid the bills and kept her busy. Every morning, she'd clock in at 6, put on her work gloves, and start sorting through the endless piles of trash and recyclables that came through the facility. That Tuesday morning in June started like any other. The sun was already blazing hot even though it was barely 7 o'clock. Maria was working near the large conveyor belt, separating plastic bottles from regular trash when she heard something strange. At first she thought it was a cat. The recycling center got a lot of stray animals looking for food in the garbage, but this sound was different. It was weaker, more desperate. Maria stopped what she was doing and listened carefully. There it was again, a crying sound, but not quite like any animal she'd heard before. Her heart started beating faster. She followed the sound to a pile of black garbage bags near the compactor machine. The smell was awful. Rotting food, dirty diapers, and who knows what else. Maria had gotten used to bad smells over the years, but she had to breathe through her mouth as she got closer. The crying was louder now, and suddenly Maria realized what it was. That wasn't an animal. That was a baby. Her hands shook as she started tearing open the garbage bags. She didn't care about the mess anymore, didn't care about the smell. She just had to find that baby. Bag after bag, she ripped them open, throwing trash everywhere. Some of her co-workers noticed the commotion and started running over. "What's going on?" Someone shouted. "There's a baby in here." Maria yelled back, her voice cracking with panic. Finally, in a torn blue garbage bag, she found her. A tiny baby girl wrapped in a dirty blanket that might have been white once. The baby's lips had a blue tint to them, and her little body felt cold even in the hot morning sun. She was barely crying now, just making small whimpering sounds. Maria carefully lifted her out of the trash, holding her close to her chest. "Call 911. Now!" Maria screamed to her co-workers. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't dial her phone herself. One of the other workers grabbed his phone and made the call while Maria sat down on the ground, still holding the baby tight. She tried to warm her up with her own body heat, talking to her softly. "It's okay, baby. You're safe now. Help is coming. Just hold on, sweet girl. Please hold on." The baby couldn't have weighed more than 7 or 8 pounds. She looked newborn, maybe only a few days old. Maria noticed the umbilical cord stump was still attached. How could someone do this? How could anyone throw away a precious baby like she was nothing more than garbage? The minutes felt like hours as they waited for the ambulance. Maria kept checking to make sure the baby was still breathing. Every small movement, every tiny sound was a relief. Around them, garbage trucks continued to arrive, completely unaware of the drama unfolding in their facility. Maria's supervisor had stopped all operations near the compactor. If that baby had been just a few feet closer to the machine, if Maria had been working in a different section that day, if she hadn't heard those cries, she didn't want to think about what could have happened. The paramedics arrived in less than 10 minutes, though it felt much longer. They rushed over with their equipment, and a young female paramedic gently took the baby from Maria's arms. Maria didn't want to let go. She'd only held this child for maybe 15 minutes, but already she felt connected to her in a way she couldn't explain. "We need to get her to the hospital right away," the paramedic said, wrapping the baby in warm blankets and checking her vital signs. "She's severely dehydrated and hypothermic. Did you see anyone else around when you found her?" Maria shook her head. "No, just the garbage bags. I heard her crying and I started looking. I don't know how long she'd been out here." "You saved her life," the other paramedic said, preparing the stretcher. "Another hour or 2 in this heat and it would have been too late." They loaded the baby into the ambulance and sped away, sirens blaring. Maria stood there in the parking lot, covered in garbage and filth, tears streaming down her face. Her supervisor walked over and put a hand on her shoulder. "Take the rest of the day off," he said quietly. "Go home, clean up, and try to rest. The police will probably want to talk to you." But Maria didn't want to go home. She couldn't. She needed to know if that baby was going to be okay. After washing up in the facility's bathroom, she drove straight to St. Mary's Hospital and asked about the infant brought in from the recycling center. The nurse at the desk gave her a sympathetic look. "Are you family?" "No, I'm the one who found her. I just need to know if she's going to make it." The nurse made a phone call, spoke quietly to someone, then turned back to Maria. "The doctors are working on her now. Why don't you have a seat in the waiting room? I'll let them know you're here." Maria sat in that waiting room for 6 hours. She watched families come and go, heard announcements over the intercom, drank terrible coffee from the vending machine. She couldn't leave. It felt wrong to just walk away from that baby after everything. Finally, a doctor came out to see her. He looked tired, but he was smiling, which Maria took as a good sign. "You're the woman who found the baby?" he asked. Maria nodded, standing up quickly. "Is she okay? Please tell me she's okay." "She's stable," the doctor said. It was touch and go for a while. She was extremely dehydrated and her body temperature was dangerously low. "We estimate she'd been exposed to the elements for at least 6 to 8 hours, maybe longer. But she's a fighter. She's on IV fluids now and warming up nicely. If you hadn't found her when you did..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Maria felt her knees go weak with relief. "Can I see her?" "Not right now. She needs rest and we need to run more tests. But the police are here and they'd like to speak with you about how you found her. Child Protective Services is involved now too. They'll be looking for whoever did this." The next few hours were a blur of questions. Maria told the police officers everything she could remember. What time she arrived at work, when she heard the crying. Exactly where the baby had been placed in the pile of garbage. They took photos of the scene, collected the bags and blanket as evidence, and assured Maria they would do everything possible to find the person responsible. "This baby owes you her life," one of the officers said. "Not many people would have acted so quickly." "You're a hero." Maria didn't feel like a hero. She just felt grateful that she'd been in the right place at the right time. As she finally drove home that evening, exhausted and emotionally drained, all she could think about was that tiny baby fighting for her life in the hospital. She wondered what kind of desperate situation would make someone abandon their child like that. And she wondered what would happen to the baby once she recovered. Maria had no idea that this was just the beginning of a story that would change her life forever. Maria woke up the next morning to her phone buzzing nonstop. Text messages, missed calls, friend requests on social media. She rubbed her eyes and checked the screen, confused about what was happening. Then she saw it. Her face was on the local news website with the headline, "Recycling Center Worker Saves Abandoned Baby's Life." Someone at the hospital must have talked to reporters. By noon, 3 different news crews were waiting outside Maria's apartment building. They wanted interviews, photos, her story. At first she said no. She didn't do it for attention or recognition. She just did what anyone would have done. But the reporters were persistent, and eventually Maria agreed to talk to one local station. The interview aired that evening. Maria sat in her small living room, still wearing her work uniform because she'd come straight from her shift. She told the story simply, honestly. How she heard the crying, found the baby, waited at the hospital. The reporter asked her how it felt to save a life. "I don't know if I saved her life," Maria said, looking down at her hands. "I just couldn't walk away. She needed help and I was there. That's all." But the community saw it differently. By the next morning, Maria Rodriguez was being called a hero across the entire city. The mayor's office called and said they wanted to give her a citizenship award. Local businesses offered her gift cards and free services. Someone even started a fundraising page for her. Though Maria had no idea what the money was supposed to be for, she wasn't the one who needed help. The baby did. The hospital had named her Hope. Child Protective Services needed to call her something while they searched for her biological parents, and Hope seemed fitting. She was a miracle baby, the doctor said. Against all odds, she was getting stronger every day. The IV fluids had worked, her body temperature was normal, and she was starting to eat properly. Maria visited Hope every single day after work. She'd wash up, change out of her work clothes, and drive straight to the hospital. At first, the nurses were hesitant. Maria wasn't family, wasn't authorized as a visitor, but they could see how much she cared, and eventually, they started letting her spend time in the neonatal unit. The first time Maria held Hope properly, not in a panic covered in trash, but in a clean, quiet hospital room, something shifted inside her. Hope was so tiny, so perfect. Her little fingers wrapped around Maria's thumb, and Maria felt her heart break and heal at the same time. She'd always wanted children, always dreamed of being a mother, but life hadn't worked out that way. Maria was 42 years old. She'd been married once years ago, but it didn't last. She'd tried fertility treatments in her 30s, spent all her savings on procedures that didn't work. Eventually, she'd accepted that being a mother just wasn't in the cards for her. She threw herself into work, tried to be okay with her life as it was. But holding Hope in her arms, Maria felt something she hadn't felt in years: purpose, connection, love. "You're here again," one of the nurses said, smiling as she checked Hope's monitors. Her name was Patricia, and she'd been taking care of Hope since she arrived. "You know, we've had a lot of visitors asking about her, people wanting to adopt, but I haven't seen anyone as dedicated as you." Maria looked up. "People want to adopt her?" Of course. Everyone knows her story now. Child Protective Services has been getting calls all week. Once she's cleared for discharge, they'll need to place her somewhere. Foster care, at least temporarily, until they figure out what happened and whether they can find her birth parents. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Hope going to some foster home with strangers. People who didn't know her, didn't know what she'd been through. The thought made Maria's chest tight with anxiety. She got up, made coffee, and sat at her kitchen table until sunrise thinking. By morning, she'd made a decision. She called Child Protective Services as soon as their office opened. "I'd like to apply to be a foster parent," Maria said, "for the baby I found, Hope." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Ms. Rodriguez, that's wonderful that you want to help, but the foster care process can take months. Background checks, home inspections, training classes. I'll do whatever it takes," Maria interrupted. "I know it won't be easy, but I can give her a good home. I promise." Maybe it was the media attention. Maybe it was the way Maria's story had touched the entire community. Or maybe it was just good timing. But Child Protective Services fast-tracked Maria's application. They did an emergency background check, sent someone to inspect her apartment, and within 2 weeks, Maria was approved as a temporary foster parent for Hope. The day she brought Hope home was the happiest day of Maria's life. She'd converted her spare bedroom into a nursery, buying everything a baby could possibly need. A crib with soft yellow sheets, a changing table, stuffed animals, tiny clothes in every size. Her neighbors had donated some items, and local businesses had sent gifts when they heard Hope was going home with the woman who saved her. Maria carried Hope through the door of her apartment and just stood there for a moment, looking around. A month ago, she'd been living alone, going to work, coming home to an empty apartment. Now she had a baby, a beautiful, perfect baby who needed her. "Welcome home, sweet girl," Maria whispered, kissing Hope's forehead. Those first few weeks were hard. Maria had never taken care of a baby before. She didn't know about feeding schedules or sleep patterns or why Hope cried at certain times. She called Patricia, the nurse from the hospital, at least twice a day with questions. Patricia was patient and helpful, always reassuring Maria that she was doing fine. But despite the exhaustion and the learning curve, Maria had never been happier. She started documenting everything on social media. Photos of Hope sleeping, videos of her making funny faces, updates on her development. People loved following their story. Maria's account went from a few hundred followers to over 50,000 in just 2 weeks. The comments poured in. People saying how inspiring Maria was, how lucky Hope was to have her, how this was meant to be. Some people shared their own adoption stories or talked about wanting to help children in need. Maria read every comment, feeling grateful for the support. Then someone suggested starting a fundraiser. Not for Maria, but for Hope's future. Money for her education, for anything she might need as she grew up. Maria hesitated at first, but people insisted. Within days, the fundraising campaign had raised over $30,000. The community had completely embraced both of them. Maria took a leave of absence from work to focus on being Hope's mom. Her supervisor understood and told her the job would be waiting whenever she was ready to come back. But Maria wasn't thinking about recycling centers anymore. She was thinking about adoption. She met with a lawyer who specialized in adoption cases. He explained the process, the requirements, the timeline. It could take 6 months to a year, maybe longer. But if no biological parents came forward to claim Hope, and if Child Protective Services approved the adoption, Maria could become Hope's legal mother. "I want to do it," Maria said without hesitation. "Whatever it takes. She's already my daughter in every way that matters. I just need it to be official," the lawyer nodded. "I'll start preparing the paperwork. But Ms. Rodriguez, I have to be honest with you. If the biological mother comes forward at any point, things get complicated. She would have rights, possibly even the right to get her baby back depending on the circumstances." Maria's stomach dropped. Even after abandoning her? After leaving her in the trash? The law tries to keep biological families together when possible. I'm not saying it would definitely happen, but you need to be prepared for that possibility. Maria looked down at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her carrier. She couldn't imagine giving her up. Wouldn't imagine it. Hope was hers now. They belonged together. Surely no judge would take a baby away from someone who loved her and give her back to a person who had thrown her away. It won't happen, Maria said firmly. No one who really wanted her would have done what they did. Whoever left Hope in that trash doesn't deserve to be her mother. I do. The lawyer gave her a sympathetic look but didn't argue. He'd seen cases like this before and knew that biology often won out over love in the court system. But he didn't want to crush Maria's hope. Not when she was so happy, so committed to this child. Maria went home that day and held Hope a little tighter. She took more photos, posted more updates, and wrote about how adoption was the next step in their journey. The comments flooded in again, all positive, all supportive. Everyone agreed that Maria was Hope's real mother now. That biology didn't matter. That love was what made a family. For 2 beautiful months, Maria lived in that certainty. She and Hope had story time every night, went for walks in the park, visited the pediatrician for checkups. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly how Maria had always dreamed her life could be. And then the phone call came that would shatter everything. Maria was feeding Hope her morning bottle when her phone rang. She almost didn't answer. It was a number she didn't recognize and she was busy. But something made her pick up. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fate. Ms. Rodriguez, this is Linda Chen from Child Protective Services. I need you to come to our office today. It's urgent. Maria's heart dropped. Is something wrong? Is it about the adoption? There was a pause. A long, terrible pause. A young woman has come forward claiming to be Hope's biological mother. She wants her baby back. The bottle slipped from Maria's hand, formula spilling across the floor. She couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. This wasn't possible. It had been 2 months. No one had come forward. Everyone said Hope was abandoned, unwanted. Everyone said Maria could adopt her. Ms. Rodriguez? Are you still there? Yes, Maria whispered. I'm here. We need to discuss next steps. Can you be here by 2 o'clock? Maria wanted to scream no. Wanted to hang up and run away with Hope somewhere they could never be found. But she just said yes and ended the call. She looked down at Hope, who was looking back at her with those big, innocent eyes. How could someone who left this baby in the trash suddenly want her back now? At the Child Protective Services office, Maria met Linda in a small conference room. The social worker looked tired and sympathetic. She knew this wasn't going to be an easy conversation. Tell me about her, Maria said, her voice shaking. Tell me about this woman. Linda opened a file. Her name is Jasmine Walker. She's 19 years old. She came to us 3 days ago with her aunt saying she's Hope's biological mother and that she wants to reclaim custody. Why now? Maria demanded. It's been 2 months. Where was she when Hope was dying in that trash pile? Where was she when I was up all night making sure she was breathing okay? Where was she for any of it? I understand you're upset. Upset doesn't even begin to cover it. Maria stood up, pacing the small room. That baby is mine now. I've been her mother since day one. Not biologically, but in every single way that actually matters. Linda waited for Maria to sit back down. Ms. Rodriguez, I know this is devastating, but we have to follow the law. Jasmine claims she gave birth to Hope, but was suffering from severe postpartum depression and psychosis. She says she wasn't in her right mind when she left the baby. That's convenient, Maria said bitterly. Now that someone else has done all the hard work, now that Hope is healthy and thriving, suddenly she wants to be a mother? There's going to be a hearing. A judge will decide what's best for Hope. In the meantime, Jasmine has requested supervised visitation rights. Maria felt like the walls were closing in. You're telling me I have to let this woman who threw Hope away like garbage, spend time with her? With my daughter? She's Hope's biological mother, Maria. Unless we can prove she's unfit or dangerous, the law gives her certain rights. The first supervised visit was scheduled for the following week. Maria barely slept the night before. She dressed Hope in the prettiest outfit she had, did her hair with a tiny bow, and drove to the visitation center with her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. The visitation room was depressing. Pale walls, cheap furniture, toys scattered in the corner. A social worker named Tom was there to supervise. He smiled at Maria kindly, probably having handled dozens of situations like this before. "You can wait in the other room," Tom said. "I'll call you when the hour's up." "I want to stay, Ms. Rodriguez." "I want to stay," Maria repeated firmly. "If she's going to be with my daughter, I'm going to be here." Tom looked like he wanted to argue but didn't. Instead, he just nodded and gestured to a chair against the wall. Maria sat down, holding Hope close, and waited. When Jasmine Walker walked through that door, Maria wasn't prepared for what she saw. She'd expected someone older, maybe hardened by life, someone who looked capable of doing something so terrible. But Jasmine looked like a child herself. She was thin, too thin, with dark circles under her eyes. She wore clothes that were too big for her, like she'd borrowed them from someone else. Her hands shook as she stood in the doorway, staring at Hope. "Hi," Jasmine said softly. Her voice cracked. "Hi, baby girl." Maria held Hope tighter. She didn't want to hand her over. Every instinct in her body screamed to protect this child from the person who had hurt her. But Tom was waiting, and Maria knew she didn't have a choice. "It's okay," Tom said gently to Maria. "I'm right here. Nothing bad is going to happen." With trembling hands, Maria stood up and walked over to Jasmine. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Two women who loved the same baby for completely different reasons. Then Maria placed Hope in Jasmine's arms and immediately took 2 steps back. Jasmine started crying the moment she held Hope. Not gentle tears, but big, gasping sobs that shook her whole body. She sat down in the chair, cradling Hope against her chest, and just cried. "I'm so sorry," Jasmine kept saying. "I'm so sorry, baby. Mommy's so sorry." Maria watched from her chair, her own tears streaming down her face. She hated Jasmine, hated her for what she'd done, for coming back, for ruining everything. But watching this broken young woman hold Hope, Maria also felt something else. Confusion. Doubt. If Jasmine didn't care about Hope, why was she crying like that? Why did she look so devastated? The hour felt like both a minute and a lifetime. Tom made small talk with Jasmine, asking about where she was living now, how she was feeling. Jasmine answered in short sentences, never taking her eyes off Hope. She traced Hope's tiny features with her finger like she was trying to memorize every detail. When the visit ended, Jasmine didn't want to let go. Tom had to gently remind her that time was up. Jasmine kissed Hope's forehead over and over, whispering promises about seeing her again soon, about how much she loved her. Maria took Hope back without saying a word and left the building as fast as she could. Once she was in her car, she broke down completely. Hope started crying too, sensing her distress. Maria tried to calm down, tried to be strong, but she couldn't stop the panic attack that was building in her chest. That night, Maria posted on social media for the first time since the visit. She didn't give details, but she wrote about how someone was trying to take Hope away from her. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of comments poured in, all supporting Maria. People said she was Hope's real mother, that biology didn't matter, that anyone who could abandon a baby didn't deserve a second chance. But there were other comments too. Comments that made Maria uncomfortable. Some people said they understood postpartum depression was a real illness, that young mothers needed support, not judgment. That maybe Jasmine deserved compassion too. Maria deleted those comments. She didn't want to hear it. She didn't want to think about Jasmine's side of the story. The court hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Maria's lawyer told her to be prepared for a fight. The judge would hear testimony from both sides, review medical records, consider what was best for Hope. It wasn't going to be simple or quick. Those 3 weeks were torture. Maria had to take Hope to 2 more supervised visits with Jasmine. Each time was agony. Watching Jasmine hold Hope, watching Hope not cry or fuss in her arms, watching the way Jasmine looked at her daughter with so much love and regret. It made everything more complicated. Maria tried to focus on building her case. She documented everything she did for Hope. Every doctor's appointment, every milestone, every moment of care. She had her lawyer gather statements from friends and neighbors about what a good mother she was. She even did another interview with the local news, carefully mentioning that she was fighting to keep Hope safe from someone who had abandoned her. The online community rallied around Maria even more. The fundraiser grew to over $70,000. People sent her cards and gifts of support. Local politicians tweeted about her case, calling her an example of what foster parents should be. Maria felt validated, justified, righteous in her fight. But late at night, when Hope was asleep and Maria was alone with her thoughts, doubt crept in. She remembered Jasmine's face during that first visit, the way she cried, the way she held Hope like she was the most precious thing in the world, the way she whispered apologies over and over. What if Jasmine really had been sick? What if she really hadn't been in her right mind? What if she genuinely loved Hope and had made a terrible mistake in the worst moment of her life? Maria pushed those thoughts away. She had to, because if she let herself believe that Jasmine deserved a second chance, then she might lose Hope forever. And Maria couldn't survive that. Hope had become her entire world, her entire reason for living. Without her, Maria didn't know who she was anymore. The day of the hearing arrived. Maria dressed in her best clothes and held Hope close as they entered the courthouse. Her lawyer walked beside her, briefcase in hand, ready for battle. Across the hallway, Maria saw Jasmine with her own lawyer and an older woman who must have been her aunt. They didn't speak to each other. Just entered the courtroom and sat on opposite sides, waiting for the judge to decide who deserved to be Hope's mother. What Maria didn't know was that the judge had ordered an investigation. A thorough investigation into everything that happened the day Hope was found. And what that investigation had uncovered was about to shock everyone in that courtroom. The courtroom was quiet except for the sound of papers shuffling and people shifting in their seats. Maria sat at her table, Hope sleeping peacefully in her arms. She glanced across the room at Jasmine, who looked terrified. Good, Maria thought. She should be scared. Judge Patricia Morrison entered and everyone stood. She was an older woman with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and glasses perched on her nose. Maria had heard she was fair but strict. She didn't tolerate nonsense in her courtroom. Please be seated, Judge Morrison said, settling into her chair and opening the file in front of her. This is a custody hearing regarding the minor child currently known as Hope Rodriguez, biological name unknown, approximately 3 months old. We're here to determine placement and custody arrangements. Maria's lawyer stood up first. His name was Richard Chen, and he'd been practicing family law for 20 years. He was confident, polished, and had assured Maria that they had a strong case. Your Honor, my client, Maria Rodriguez, saved this child's life. She found Hope abandoned in a recycling center, left to die among garbage. For the past 2 months, Ms. Rodriguez has provided exemplary care. The child is thriving, healthy, and bonded with my client. Ms. Rodriguez has completed all foster care requirements and wishes to adopt Hope permanently. Richard presented photos of Maria and Hope together, medical records showing Hope's excellent health, letters from neighbors and friends testifying to Maria's character. It looked good. It looked really good. Then Jasmine's lawyer stood up. Her name was Patricia Gonzalez, and she was a public defender assigned to the case. She looked young, maybe just a few years out of law school. Your Honor, my client Jasmine Walker deeply regrets her actions. She was suffering from severe postpartum depression and psychosis following Hope's birth. She had no family support, no prenatal care, and was essentially homeless. In a moment of complete mental breakdown, she made a terrible decision. But she's been receiving treatment for the past month. She's stable, and she desperately wants to be reunited with her daughter. Patricia presented medical records documenting Jasmine's mental health treatment. A letter from a psychiatrist explaining postpartum psychosis. Character statements from Jasmine's aunt and a counselor at a women's shelter where she'd been staying. Judge Morrison listened to everything carefully, taking notes. Then she cleared her throat and looked up. Before we proceed further, I need to address some additional information that has come to light during the court-ordered investigation into this case. Maria's stomach tightened. What investigation? Richard hadn't mentioned any investigation. The judge nodded to a woman sitting in the back of the courtroom. She stood up and walked to the witness stand. She was middle-aged, wearing a gray suit and carrying a thick folder. This is Detective Amanda Foster. She's been investigating the circumstances surrounding how Hope was found. Detective Foster, please share your findings with the court. Detective Foster opened her folder and pulled out several documents. Your Honor, I've spent the past 3 weeks reviewing security footage from the Pleasant Valley Recycling Center, interviewing witnesses and examining the timeline of events from the morning Hope was found. Maria felt her heart racing. Why would they need to investigate how she found Hope? Everyone knew what happened. She'd told the story 100 times. According to the initial report, Detective Foster continued, Ms. Rodriguez stated that she heard Hope crying at approximately 7:15 a.m. and immediately began searching for the source of the sound. She found Hope within a few minutes and called 911 at 7:20 a.m. The ambulance arrived at 7:32 a.m. "That sounds consistent with what we've heard," Judge Morrison said. "Yes, Your Honor. However, security footage tells a slightly different story." The detective pulled out a laptop and connected it to the courtroom's display screen. Grainy footage appeared, showing the recycling center from multiple angles. This footage shows Ms. Rodriguez arriving at work at 6:05 a.m., as she stated. At 6:43 a.m., we can see her working near the area where Hope was found. The detective pointed to a small figure on the screen, clearly Maria in her work clothes. At 6:48 a.m., Ms. Rodriguez stops working and appears to be listening to something. She looks around, takes a few steps toward the pile where Hope was found, then stops. Maria's mouth went dry. She remembered that moment. She'd heard something, wasn't sure what it was, and kept working for a bit before investigating. Ms. Rodriguez then returns to her original task. Detective Foster continued. She continues working for another 27 minutes. At 7:15 a.m., she finally walks over to the pile of garbage and begins searching. She finds Hope and calls 911 at 7:23 a.m., not 7:20 as originally stated. The courtroom was silent. Everyone was staring at Maria. "Ms. Rodriguez," Judge Morrison said slowly, "is this accurate? You heard the baby crying at 6:48 but didn't begin searching for another 27 minutes? Maria felt like she couldn't breathe. I wasn't sure what I heard. I thought it was a cat or something. I didn't realize it was a baby right away." "The footage shows you looking directly at the pile where the baby was found," Detective Foster said. "You clearly heard something significant enough to stop working and investigate the source. But then you returned to sorting recyclables." Richard stood up quickly. "Your Honor, my client was in shock. She's already explained that she wasn't certain what she heard. When she realized it might be a baby, she acted immediately. 27 minutes is a long time when an infant is dying of exposure," the judge said, her voice hard. But Detective Foster wasn't done. She pulled out more documents. "There's something else, Your Honor. We examined Ms. Rodriguez's phone records and social media activity from that morning and the days following." Maria felt panic rising in her chest. What had they found? Ms. Rodriguez conducted multiple internet searches on her phone before and after finding Hope. At 6:30 a.m., before she heard the baby crying, she searched for how to adopt a newborn and private adoption costs. At 7:45 a.m., after the ambulance had left with Hope, she searched can foster parents adopt abandoned children, and how long before abandoned baby can be adopted. The detective continued. Furthermore, Ms. Rodriguez created the fundraising campaign for Hope's adoption just 6 days after finding her, while Hope was still in intensive care at the hospital. She also contacted an adoption attorney on day 4, before being approved as a foster parent, before even knowing if Hope would survive. The judge looked at Maria with a completely different expression now, not sympathetic anymore, suspicious. "Ms. Rodriguez, these searches and actions suggest a pattern of behavior that is concerning. Can you explain why you were researching adoption before you even found Hope?" Maria's mind raced. "I've wanted to adopt for years. I've always researched it off and on. It's just something I looked at sometimes. It doesn't mean anything." "The timing is quite coincidental," Judge Morrison said. Richard tried to defend Maria, arguing that wanting to help an abandoned baby wasn't a crime, that Maria had acted heroically regardless of the timeline. But the damage was done. The judge looked skeptical. The courtroom was buzzing with whispers, and Jasmine's lawyer looked like she'd just won the lottery. Then Patricia Gonzalez stood up again. "Your Honor, there's one more thing the investigation uncovered that's relevant to my client's case." Oh no, Maria thought. What now? Records show that on the morning Hope was abandoned, June 14th, a 911 call was placed at 5:27 a.m. The caller said, and I quote, "I left my baby at the Pleasant Valley Recycling Center. Please send help. I think something's wrong with me. Please help her." The call was logged but never dispatched. There was an error in the emergency system that day. The call fell through the cracks. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. Maria felt dizzy. "Are you saying," the judge asked slowly, "that Ms. Walker actually called for help for her baby but no one responded?" "Yes, Your Honor." My client left Hope at the recycling center during a psychotic episode at approximately 5:15 a.m. But within 12 minutes, she regained enough clarity to realize what she'd done and called 911. If that call had been properly dispatched, Hope would have been found within minutes instead of hours. Jasmine was crying in her seat. Her aunt had her arm around her shoulders. Patricia continued. My client didn't just abandon her baby and disappear. She tried to get help immediately. The system failed her and Hope. And then, when Ms. Rodriguez did hear Hope crying, she waited nearly half an hour before acting. Who really endangered this child? Maria couldn't believe what she was hearing. This was all wrong. She was the hero. She saved Hope. How had this become about her somehow being the bad person? Judge Morrison called a recess. Maria's lawyer pulled her into a private room. Did you know you waited that long? Richard asked, his voice tight. I told you I wasn't sure what I heard. Maria, the security footage is damning. And those searches on your phone, the fundraising campaign before Hope was even stable. It looks like you saw an opportunity and you took it. That's not what happened, Maria insisted. But even as she said it, she wasn't completely sure. Had she hesitated when she first heard Hope? Had some part of her brain, some unconscious part, wanted to wait? Wanted Hope to be in worse condition so there would be no question about Jasmine getting her back? No, she couldn't have done that. She wouldn't have done that. When court resumed, Judge Morrison looked grave. I'm ordering a full psychological evaluation for both Ms. Rodriguez and Ms. Walker. I'm also requesting additional testimony from medical experts about postpartum psychosis and about the effects of delayed rescue on infant trauma. We will reconvene in 2 weeks. As Maria left the courthouse, reporters swarmed her. The story had taken a dark turn and they wanted answers. Maria pushed through them without commenting, holding Hope tight against her chest. That night, the comments on her social media had changed. People who had supported her were now questioning her motives. Others defended her fiercely, saying the investigation was trying to make her look bad to protect the system that failed to respond to Jasmine's 911 call. Maria's life, which had been perfect just days ago, was falling apart. And the worst part was that she couldn't stop thinking about that security footage, about those 27 minutes, about why she hadn't run to help Hope the moment she heard crying. What had she been thinking during those 27 minutes? And if she was being completely honest with herself, had she really been confused about the sound, or had she known deep down exactly what she was hearing? The psychological evaluation was the hardest thing Maria had ever done. For 3 hours, she sat in a small office with Dr. Rebecca Wallace, a court-appointed psychologist, and answered questions that dug into every corner of her life. Her failed marriage, her struggles with infertility, her depression, the treatments that didn't work, the dreams she'd given up on. Tell me about the moment you heard Hope crying, Dr. Wallace said, pen hovering over her notepad. Maria had told this story so many times, but now, sitting in this quiet office with someone trained to see through lies and half-truths, she found it harder to repeat the version she'd been telling. I heard something, Maria said slowly. At first I thought maybe it was an animal. But you knew it might be a baby? Maria hesitated. I guess part of me knew, but I didn't want to believe it. Who leaves a baby in a recycling center? Why did you go back to work instead of investigating immediately? This was the question Maria had been asking herself every night since the hearing. Why hadn't she run over right away? Why had she waited? Maria's voice cracked. I think I was scared. If it was a baby, if I found a baby that someone had thrown away, then I'd have to do something about it. I'd have to call the police and hand the baby over to someone else. And there was this tiny voice in my head saying, what if this is your chance? Dr. Wallace wrote something down. Your chance for what? To be a mother, Maria whispered. I've wanted it my whole life. I tried everything, spent every penny I had, and it never worked. Then I heard that baby crying, and part of me thought, maybe this is meant to be. Maybe if I wait a little longer, if she's in worse condition, if the situation is more desperate, then no one would question me keeping her. Saying it out loud made Maria feel sick. She started crying, deep sobs that shook her whole body. But I didn't let her suffer on purpose. I swear I didn't. I was just confused and scared, and I didn't know what to do. When I finally went over there and saw her, saw how tiny and helpless she was, I wanted to die. I called 911 immediately. I saved her. But you waited 27 minutes first. I waited 27 minutes first, Maria admitted, Dr. Wallace's report was delivered to the judge along with Jasmine's psychological evaluation. When they returned to court 2 weeks later, Maria felt like she was walking to her own execution. Judge Morrison had read everything: the medical reports, the psychological evaluations, additional testimony from experts on postpartum psychosis and infant trauma. She looked tired, like this case had aged her. "This has been one of the most difficult cases I've handled in my 30 years on the bench," the judge began. "We have 2 women who both loved the same child. We have a biological mother who made a terrible mistake while suffering from a genuine mental illness. And we have a foster mother who saved a baby's life but whose motivations are now in question." Maria held her breath. "The evidence shows that Ms. Walker was experiencing severe postpartum psychosis when she abandoned hope. This is a well-documented mental illness that can cause new mothers to lose touch with reality. The fact that Ms. Walker called 911 within 12 minutes of leaving hope demonstrates that some part of her knew what she was doing was wrong and tried to get help. The failure of the emergency system to respond to that call is a separate issue that is being addressed by the city." Jasmine was crying quietly. Her aunt squeezed her hand. "However," Judge Morrison continued, "Ms. Rodriguez's actions also raised serious concerns. While she did ultimately save Hope's life, the delay in response and her subsequent behavior suggest that she may have seen Hope's situation as an opportunity rather than purely as a rescue mission. Dr. Wallace's evaluation indicates that Ms. Rodriguez was suffering from unresolved trauma related to her infertility and may have experienced what the doctor calls a dissociative episode when she heard Hope crying. In other words, part of her mind recognized the crying, but another part couldn't process it properly because of her desperate desire to become a mother." Maria felt her lawyer's hand on her shoulder, trying to comfort her. "Both women were dealing with serious mental health issues," the judge said. "Both women made choices that endangered this child. But I have to determine what is in Hope's best interest moving forward." The courtroom was completely silent. "After reviewing all the evidence, I am ruling that Hope will be returned to her biological mother, Jasmine Walker, under strict supervision and with conditions." Maria felt like she'd been stabbed. She looked down at Hope, asleep in her arms, and couldn't imagine letting her go. Judge Morrison continued, "Ms. Walker will continue mental health treatment, will participate in parenting classes, and will have regular check-ins with Child Protective Services for the next year. She will live with her aunt, who has agreed to help support both Jasmine and Hope. If Ms. Walker shows any signs of relapse or if Hope's well-being is threatened in any way, custody will be immediately revoked." Jasmine was crying so hard she could barely breathe. Her lawyer was hugging her. "As for Ms. Rodriguez," the judge said, and Maria looked up with red, swollen eyes, "you will not face criminal charges. Dr. Wallace's evaluation makes it clear that you were not in your right mind when you delayed rescuing Hope. However, your foster care license is revoked. You will not be approved for foster care or adoption services again until you complete extensive therapy and receive clearance from a mental health professional." Maria nodded numbly. She couldn't speak. "There is one more matter to address," Judge Morrison said. "The fundraising campaign that was created in Hope's name has raised over $70,000. I am ordering that this money be split. Half will go to Ms. Walker to help with Hope's care, housing, and other needs. The other half will go to a newly established city fund for supporting new mothers in crisis situations, so that no other mother finds herself in the desperate situation Ms. Walker was in." The judge banged her gavel. "Court is adjourned." The next few days were a blur. Maria had to pack up all of Hope's things, all the clothes and toys and furniture she'd bought. Child Protective Services arranged for a transition period where Maria could visit Hope a few times to help with the handover. But it was agony. Each visit was harder than the last. The final goodbye was at Jasmine's aunt's house. It was a small but clean home in a decent neighborhood. Jasmine's aunt, whose name was Carmen, welcomed Maria kindly despite everything. "I want you to know," Carmen said softly, "that we're grateful you saved her life. Whatever happened, whatever your reasons, you did save her, and we won't forget that." Maria nodded, unable to speak. She held Hope one last time, memorizing every detail of her face, the way her tiny nose wrinkled when she slept, the soft sounds she made, the weight of her in Maria's arms. "I love you so much," Maria whispered, kissing Hope's forehead. "I'm sorry I wasn't perfect. I'm sorry I couldn't be what you needed, but I do love you. I always will." She handed Hope to Jasmine, who took her carefully. The two women looked at each other for a long moment. There was pain there and anger, but also something else. Understanding, maybe, or at least the beginning of it. "Thank you," Jasmine said quietly, "for saving her. For taking care of her. I know you love her too." Maria left before she completely broke down. She drove home to her empty apartment, to the nursery that would have to be dismantled, and cried until she had no tears left. The months that followed were dark. Maria started therapy, working through her grief and her issues around infertility. She learned about dissociative episodes and how trauma can make people do things they wouldn't normally do. She learned that wanting something too much can make you act in ways that hurt others, even when you don't mean to. But she also started healing, slowly, painfully, but healing nonetheless. She returned to work at the recycling center. Her coworkers were kind, never mentioning what had happened unless Maria brought it up first. She found a strange kind of peace in the routine work, in the familiar sounds and smells of the place where everything had changed. 6 months after the final hearing, Maria received an unexpected message. It was from Jasmine asking if Maria would like to visit Hope. Maria's first instinct was to say no, that it would be too painful. But something made her say yes. When she arrived at Carmen's house, Jasmine answered the door holding Hope, who was now almost a year old. The baby had grown so much, had more hair, was bigger and more alert. She looked healthy and happy. "Hi," Jasmine said with a nervous smile. "Hi," Maria replied. They sat in the living room, awkward at first, but then Jasmine started talking about Hope's milestones, the funny things she did, how she loved bath time and hated peas. Maria shared stories from when Hope was smaller, making Jasmine laugh. "I've been thinking," Jasmine said after a while, "about how we both love her. About how we both made mistakes because we weren't okay in our heads. And I thought, maybe we could both be in her life. Not as co-parents or anything official, but maybe you could visit sometimes. Carmen says it takes a village to raise a child. Maybe you could be part of our village." Maria felt tears streaming down her face. "I'd like that," she whispered. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the ending Maria had dreamed of where she got to be Hope's mother. But it was something. It was a chance to still be part of Hope's life, to watch her grow, to love her from a different kind of distance. Over the next year, Maria visited once a month. She and Jasmine developed an unlikely friendship, bonded by their shared love for Hope and their understanding of what it was like to struggle with mental health. Jasmine thrived as a mother with proper support. Carmen helped with childcare while Jasmine took classes to become a medical assistant. The money from the fundraiser helped them move into a bigger apartment and covered childcare costs. Maria also channeled her experience into advocacy work. She started a support group for women struggling with infertility, helping them process their grief in healthy ways. She worked with Child Protective Services to improve their mental health screening for foster parents. She even testified before the city council about the need for better emergency response systems after learning that the 9/11 failure that happened with Jasmine's call had happened to others too. The local news station did a follow-up story a year after the trial. It wasn't the triumphant adoption story anyone had expected. Instead, it was a more complicated story about mental health, second chances, and how love can look different than we imagine. Maria was interviewed in her apartment, which no longer had a nursery but did have photos of Hope on the wall from her monthly visits. "Do you regret what happened?" the reporter asked.